Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Stop COVID Deaths webinar series brought to you by the University of the Philippines. Thank you for being part of our credible online community, and for all those who are joining us for the very first time, welcome po at sana po masayahan po kayo sa ating webinar for today. We are really very fortunate. I'm really excited for this topic po, no, for that we will be covering, kasi I think this is konti lang po yung mga topics natin with regards to climate change and really how it relates to the health sector. So, international news full of reports of forest fires, floods, monster typhoons, drought, melting of the ice caps, changes in the behavior of animals and insects, and a range of disaster situations. So, ano po ba ang climate change and how does it impact human health? Is the health sector merely on the receiving end of conditions and diseases caused by extremes of temperature, displacement, or migration? And why should the health sector care about climate change? Which population groups are most prone to the effects of climate change, and should we start preparing for worsening climate scenario? At saan po ba tayo talaga dapat magsisimula para po ma-address ang climate change? So in this episode of the Stop COVID webinar series, we bring you experts on climate change and health to discuss different angles and perspectives, including practical tips on the role of the frontliners. I'm Dr. Raymond Francis Sarmiento, Director of the National Telehealth Center, National Institutes of Health, University of the Philippines, Manila. Always a pleasure to be with all of you during our regular Friday, and always looking forward to our webinars because I get to share hosting duties with our adjunct research faculty at the National Telehealth Center. Also, international renowned public health communications expert, Dr. Susie Pinedo Mercado. Dr. Susie?
Hi, Raymond. Good afternoon. Magandang hapon po sa inyo lahat. Saan man kayo naroon. We hope you're doing well. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone who's watching on the playback, YouTube, Facebook. Maraming salamat. I know some of you can't make it on a Friday, but you make it a point to watch the replay. So that's all being made available to you by TVUP. And we're just glad that you're here, everyone who's here today. We've got a very special topic. And before we go to that, as you've seen in our opening billboard, we have transitioned to broader discussions on how the pandemic has affected health outcomes. So beyond talking about COVID, although we're still always talking about COVID, and I think, Raymond, mukhang tumataas yata ang kaso dyan sa Pilipinas. Tumataas ba?
It is. So and with the backdrop po na marami na pong mga bata na papapasukan, yun po ang inaalala po ng mga magulang din.
Yeah, so we haven't really dropped the discussion on COVID. So the C is for COVID, current COVID-19 problems, and then O for other outbreaks, V for viruses, I for infections, and D for disasters. So malawak na malawak yung pinag-uusapan natin, pero hindi po natin nakakalimutan itong COVID, no? Kasi hindi pa siya tapos, Raymond. No, we're not done yet. And it's really very interesting to see what's happening in terms of developments. So we'll try to keep you updated on all of these things. Well, we know that most of you come to the webinar because you want to get the latest news. And indeed, we have created a special segment on news from here and abroad on the news update.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Susie. Alam naman po natin na pag napag-uusapan natin yung ating, what do you call this, our news update, meron po tayong dalawang pinag-uusapan po na bagong balita. And for today, we'll be talking about a very new method on improving the speed and cost of birth. Birth defect testing, very important po, especially for the geneticists in the room. We are always looking forward to new perspectives po, no, with regards to how can we be more innovative and how can we make it more cost-effective in terms of birth defect testing. Ang sabi po dito sa balita, if the technique is confirmed, women who have had miscarriages or those undergoing prenatal screening may no longer need to rely on centralized testing lab for results. So very important po ito kasi the method po takes less than 2 hours using a palm-sized device, and the cost is only $200 per use. Kumpara po sa current testing procedures wherein women can end up paying between $1,000 to $2,000. So as much po as 10% na lang po of the high end of the cost ang babayaran po nila. Mas mabilis at mas mura po in order to detect the birth defect po. Dr. Susie?
Okay, on the coronavirus front, Britain, the first country to approve a coronavirus vaccine in late 2020, has now given the green light to a variant-adopted shot that targets both the original and the Omicron variant. It's called Moderna.o, mRNA.o. It has conditional approval as a booster for adults, and that was done on Monday. They're saying that the use of mRNA.o triggers a very strong immune response against Omicron and the original virus. So tingnan nyo nga naman, napakabilis, Raymond, napakabilis ng mga pagbabago natin sa sa larangan ng siyensya. Now they have now adapted the vaccine to target Omicron. So I think other things will come up in the future, but we're here to monitor, to give you information, and next week we'll share more news with you here on the News Update. Okay, so we're back, and we're going to talk about climate change. You know, in 1992, the World Health Organization published 1992. No, this was 40 years ago, but I remember it because I actually attended the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, and at that time, WHO published a book called Our Planet, Our Health. That was 40 years ago. And at that point in time, the World Health Organization was already making a call to address poverty, food and agriculture, water, energy, industry, human settlements, urbanization, basic services, transboundary international issues to make the world healthier. So 40 years ago, we were already talking about the impact of the environment on health. Now, fast forward to 2022, this April, the World Health Day theme was Our Planet, Our Health. Yun na naman, no? But this is now to remind our leaders about the dire effects of climate change on human health and survival, citing that, the destabilization of the world's climate is probably the single biggest health threat facing humanity. And health professionals worldwide are already responding to the health harms caused by this unfolding crisis. So, parang it's not like a disease that pops up and you count the numbers. I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing many, many extreme climate events with, I would say, still unknown health impacts in many incidences. But to the extent that we can discuss what the health impact of climate change is, that's what we're going to bring you today with our experts. And so we have brought you again the best people to talk about this. So stay with us. Meanwhile, Raymond, I think we're going to listen to our persons on the street.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Susie. For those who are joining us for the very first time, we usually try to get the pulse of the common folk on the street po, no? Which we lovingly call Person on the Street video, produced by the webinar team. And in this video, we ask the question, sa tingin po ninyo, paano nakakaapekto sa kalusugan ang climate change? Please watch this.
Personally, I think na nakaka-apekto yung climate change sa health ng tao kasi di ba, it is known that climate change is brought about yung increase ng yung pag-worsen ng greenhouse gas accumulation sa ating bansa, and yun, worsen yung quality ng air natin.
Bago yung panahon, mas lumalakas yung mga bagyo, mas tumitindi yung tag-init. Marami rin yung mga nagkakaroon ng heat stroke, nagkakaroon ng mga di maipaliwanag na sakit, di maipaliwanag na lagnat, na minsan napagkakamalan pa nating COVID.
Malaking tanong ito sa ngayon dahil yung climate change, ito na yung parang grim reality na mangyayari natin. Kahit sabihin natin yung pandemic, bunsod din ito sa pagbabago ng klima.
Sobrang nakaka-apekto yung climate change kasi yung body natin is nag-a-adjust siya, nag-regulate yung temperature natin depende sa weather na nasa paligid at or kung sa climate na kung nasan tayo. And for me, dahil sa climate change, nagbabago yung weather and hindi stable yung climate natin, naapektuhan tayo dahil sa pagbabago ito, marami ang nagkakasakit dahil hindi sanay yung katawan sa paiba-ibang weather and climate.
Mas dumudumi yung paligid, naapektuhan din yung health natin syempre. And ayan, parang actually we see it na parang kung ano-anong sakit yung lumalabas.
Nagkakaroon ng mga pagbaha, nagkakaroon ng mga kung ano-anong sakuna, mga lindol, ganyan. Napipinsala din talaga yung kabuhayan ng mga tao, lalo na sa mga syudad, sa mga probinsya, kasi nga nagbabanish din yung kanilang mga kabuhayan. At the same time, dahil nga maraming tao yung nagkakasakit, mas maraming tao din yung hindi nagkakaroon ng access sa health benefits, lalo na sa mga pampublikong ospital.
It starts with starting with our own little ways, how we can mitigate climate change and help conserve our planet. And second, of course, is to maintain our physical health.
Gaya ko po, nag-workout ako and I dance and do exercise almost every day. And I also have this meditative walking. So feeling ko nakatulong to sa akin para matulungan ako na mag-cope up sa pabago-bagong weather. And also dahil sa COVID ngayon, mas susceptible tayo sa pagkakasakit. So feeling ko na kapag physically fit tayo, mas makatulong ito para mag-adjust yung body natin.
Okay, thank you so much, TVUP. It's always great to get a sense of what people are thinking and gives us some insight on what we should be discussing later. So Raymond, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Susie. For our webinar for today, we'd like to do a little bit of housekeeping po muna. Certificates of attendance will be given to those who have watched at least 50% of the webinar duration. Ito po ang itsura po ng matatanggap po nila, essentially the format we have already sent out. Webinar certificates for webinars 111, pababa po. For 112, we are still completing that, but hopefully over the weekend we'll be able to complete that. If you feel that you should have received a certificate but did not, please email stopcoviddeaths@up.edu.ph so we could check our database. For today's webinar, we will be following again our standard panel discussion format, and after our speakers are presented, we will segue into a Q&A session. We will try to scan questions coming in not just from the Zoom but also in Facebook and YouTube and entertain those questions and try to ask them directly to our experts. But before we delve into the webinar proper, let us go into our fun quiz po muna, and then let's cue in our fun quiz intro video.
Hello, hello, hello.
Kumusta na kayo lahat?
Hi, I'm Doc Susie, the mini Doc Susie.
And I'm Doc Radar, the mini Doc Raymond. Are you ready to have fun? Simply open your browser to www.slido.com and enter your code to participate. We will discuss your answers during the panel discussion later on in the program.
We will have it flashing on your screen in a bit, and we look forward to your answers. Masaya at madali lang ito. Join na!
Thank you so much, TVUP.
Natutuwa ako.
Thank you, Dr. Susie. So we have two questions lang po for today. Very, very simple questions. For all those who are joining in Facebook and in YouTube po, if you wouldn't mind opening your internet browsers, typing in slido.com, and when you are prompted, you enter the code 5405717. That's 5405717 for you to be able to participate. For our first question, which one comes first? Heat exhaustion po ba or heat stroke? Alin po ba dyan ang nauuna? So, dito po sa ating Zoom, 89% po ang nagsasabi na heat exhaustion, and then the minority po is choosing heat stroke. So, yun po ang ating nakikita, at least for the Zoom. For Slido, iba po ang, well, dalawa lang naman po, walang sumasagot pa lang sa Slido, but hopefully, mas marami pa po ang sumagot sa ating slido.com. We'll greet those who are joining us, lalo na po from the Notre Dame de Chartres Hospital in Benguet, Oriental Mindoro Dental Chapter in Socorro, Oriental Mindoro, Senior Citizens Association in Felina Village, Tisa, Cebu City, West Metro Medical Center in Zamboanga City, the Provincial Government of Davao del Norte in Davao City, from SNLERIED from Lung Center of the Philippines, from the UPPGH, magandang hapon po sa inyo, Davao City and Pasay City viewers po natin. From Tarlac, maraming salamat po all the way from Tarlac. From Cebu City, from Western Visayas State University Medical Center, from the House of Representatives, thank you so much. The Climate Change Commission, I think may mga nanonood from the Climate Change Commission, maraming salamat. Rizal Medical Center, University of the Philippines, from Malolos, Bulacan also. Who else? From, well, dito po, from Philippine General Hospital and abroad, pero mamaya na po natin sila babatiin later on. From New Sinai School and colleges, they are also here. UPPGH Ward 1 in Medicine, those watching us from North Cotabato, maraming salamat po sa inyo. And from Davao City as mentioned po. For our question number 2, it states, which of the following are effects of climate change that affect human health? Meron po tayong 5 choices as follows: increase precipitation, unusually heavy rainfall, increase wind velocity, extreme temperature, option number 4, rising sea level, or option 5, lahat po na nabanggit or all of the above. We'd like to greet those who are joining us from the Chonin Hospital in Taipei City in Taiwan, Tubli in Bahrain, Bangkok City in Thailand, Quintos City in Vietnam, University of Hail in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Stockton and Los Angeles in California, Adelaide, Australia, St. Eustatius Auxiliary Home Foundation in the Netherlands, Antilles. May nakita po ako, yung pong taga Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, maraming salamat din po for keeping in tune and always being a regular viewer of the Stop COVID Deaths webinar series. We will not be closing our fun quiz as we move on to our webinar proper. Dr. Susie?
Yeah, thank you so much, Raymond. Maraming salamat po sa inyo lahat, all of you who joined our fun quiz. And later we'll get the answers to that, no? So we go now to our main speakers, and as I said earlier, we bring you the best speakers we can get so that we're all updated on the latest on climate and health. Okay, so our first speaker is a familiar face. He's been with us before. He's the chair of the Disaster Risk Management Subcommittee and the chair of the Department of Health Policy and Administration at the College of Public Health, University of the Philippines, Manila. Let's welcome Dr. Carlos Primero Gundran. Welcome, Charlie.
Thank you po, Doc Susie, and welcome din po sa inyong lahat. So let me share my screen now. Okay, thank you. So I think I can begin na po, no? So
Yes,
I'm tasked. Okay, so I'm tasked to talk about the impacts of climate change and health. No? So ang objectives ko po, what is climate change? So define it to you, give you examples of climate change, and then ano yung effects ng climate change niyo sa ating environment, and then eventually ano yung epekto nito sa ating mga kalusugan. No? So definition ng climate change, according to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, no? It is a change of climate which is attributed directly or it could be indirectly, no, to human activity that alters the composition of the global atmosphere, and which is in addition to natural climate variability observed over comparable time periods. No? So epekto natin, it could be directly or indirectly sa ating environment. No? So paano ba nangyayaring climate change? No? Ang cause niyan is burning fuel, di ba? Pag nagsusunog tayo ng mga fossil fuels, gasolina, diesel, no? Sinusunog natin yung mga kahoy, nagpo-produce siya ng water at saka carbon dioxide, no? And ang importanteng dito gas is carbon dioxide, no? Carbon dioxide produces it has what we call the greenhouse effect. And what is the greenhouse effect? Pagka ikaw ay nasa cold countries, di ba? Para ka magkaroon ng garden, mag-survive siya sa winter, nilalagay mo siya sa isang enclosed space para ma-trap mo yung heat and mag-survive yung mga halaman mo. And that is what we call greenhouse. And the greenhouse effect is natatrap natin yung heat na galing sa sunlight instead na nire-reflect siya outside the planet, no? Natatrap natin siya because of the greenhouse gases, and mainly CO2 and others like nitrous oxide, methane, at saka other halocarbons, no? So the extra trapped heat disrupts many of the interconnected systems in our environment, and yun yung nafe-feel natin ngayon as what we know, climate change, no? So droughts, cyclones, weathers, extreme events. So the effects of climate change can be summarized into the following. It could be extreme temperatures, it could be extreme events of natural disasters, it could affect the air quality in our environment, it could affect vector-borne diseases, waterborne diseases, it could affect our food supply, and eventually, no, it could affect our mental health. So these are the effects of climate change and related to our health. So first, let's talk about extreme temperatures. No? So the increase in overall temperature of the atmosphere and oceans associated with climate change causes changes in wind, moisture, and heat circulation patterns. So dahil tumataas yung temperature ng planet natin, nakaka-apekto ito sa direction ng wind, no? And then yung content ng moisture sa hangin natin, at saka yung heat circulation patterns natin sa hangin, pati na rin sa ilalim ng dagat. So these changes contribute to shifts in extreme weather events. No? Kaya nga tayo ngayon nagkakaroon daw ng extreme weather events, that is because of climate change dahil nag-increase na yung temperature ng mundo natin. Including extreme heat events. Yung mga nababalitaan natin, I think that was just last month na nagkaroon ng heat wave sa Europe at saka sa UK. No? And maraming naapektuhan. No? So these are extreme temperatures. Also, no, meron din tayong mga tinatawag na deep freeze na mga situations. No? So hindi lang very hot, no? Meron ding mga masyadong malamig naman na mga na temperatures naman. Okay. So, number 2 is extreme events or natural disasters na mas matindi ang impact sa ating environment. Mas matindi yung damage na nakukos sa ating environment. No? So, like for example, more frequent and intense precipitation. Mas madalas at saka mas malakas na buhos ng ulan. And one best example of that is yung ondoy, di ba? Yung ondoy is characteristically an unusual amount of rain na bumagsak in a short period of time. No? So that is one example of extreme events. More frequent and intense precipitation. Mas tumitindi yung mga pag-ulan natin ngayon, kaya tayo binabaha. Number 2, more intense hurricane rainfall or mas malakas yung bagwis ng hangin. Naalala ko noon, nung ako'y bata pa, ang pinakamalakas sa bagyo yata, signal number 3. Pero nung dumaan si Milenyo, nagkaroon tayo ng signal number 4. Nung dumaan si Yolanda, nagkaroon na tayo ng signal number 5. So more intense strength of wind related to typhoons and cyclones. And sea level rises. No? So related, which is increases in storm surge. No? So hindi lang nagra-rise yung sea level natin. And because of the extreme events, nagkakaroon tayo ng storm surge. Again, another example niyan is yung Yolanda incident natin. And kung titingnan natin yung yung EM-DAT, no? Ang frequency ng natural disaster sa buong mundo ay nag-i-increase actually. So mas dumadami mga natural disaster events sa buong mundo. So ano pa yung effects sa extreme events? Altered global rainfall patterns. So nag-iiba yung dahil sa nag-iiba yung temperature, nag-iiba yung wind directions, no? Nag-iiba yung rainfall patterns. Dati hindi binabagyo ang Mindanao area, pero ngayon binabagyo na rin siya. And increasing evaporation because of higher temperature leads to decrease in groundwater flow. And ito daw yung nagkukos din ng sinkhole formation. No? So nakaka-apekto din siya in terms of sinkhole formation, yung climate change natin. In terms of air quality, no? Climate change makes our air less healthy to breathe. Marami kang emissions ng ng carbon dioxide and other burning of fossil fuel na byproducts, ba? And greenhouse effect, higher temperatures lead to an increase in allergens and harmful air pollutants. So mas prone tayo ngayon siguro sa mga allergy at saka asthma attacks. Increase in ozone, which is a harmful air pollutant, nagkakos ka naman ng skin cancer because of that. And wildfires. Number 4, vector-borne diseases. The seasonality, distribution, prevalence of vector-borne diseases are influenced significantly by climate factors. So nakaka-apekto din siya sa seasonality ng vector-borne diseases like dengue. Primarily high and low temperature extremes and precipitation patterns. So yung high temperature, low temperature, yung amount ng ulan, nakaka-affect siya sa vector-borne diseases natin like dengue, like leptospirosis. No? So these can affect disease outbreaks, causing an increased risk of pathogen being carried to humans. Number 5, waterborne diseases. Climate change is expected to affect marine and freshwater sources in ways that will increase people's exposure to water-related contaminants. So, nagkakaroon tayo ng increasing sea surface temperatures. Actually, yung example sa Arctic, no, na 100 years ago, ito yung glacier content niya, pero at present, ngayong mga 2000, halos wala na yung glacier content niya. Natunaw na yung mga ice dahil nag-i-increase yung temperature ng buong mundo. No? So therefore, saan napupunta yung natutunaw na tubig na yan? No? So increasing sea surface temperatures, nagkakaroon tayo ng changes in precipitation, freshwater runoff, drought sa ibang lugar, sea level rise. So tumataas yung sea level natin because of this, yung natunay na glaciers natin. Coastal flooding, storm surge, no? With resulting changes in coastal salinity, turbidity, or plankton content. Katulad nito, merong mga lugar na lagi na tayong binabaha. Actually, meron din tayong mga lugar na lumulubog na. No? So this is one country in Micronesia, I believe, no? Na because of the rising sea levels, na lumulubog na yung country nila. Nawawala na sila ng island na para tirhan. No? Food supply. Climate change very likely to affect global, regional, and local food security, no? By disrupting food availability, decreasing access to food, and making utilization, no, more difficult. So from the production to the delivery, lahat na apektuhan ng climate change. Temperature and precipitation extreme can increase pathogen load, alter weed, insect, fungal populations, and increase pesticide use. So gumamit ka ng maraming pesticides, ano effect niya sa atin? Kumain ka ng salad na may pesticide, magkaka-cancer ka rin. Rising CO2 can directly influence nutritional content of foods. So hindi na nagiging nutritious yung mga foods natin because of that. Warmer temperature, greater food spoilage. Mas madaling mapanis yung mga perishable food natin dahil mas mainit yung temperatures. Extreme climate events, no, can disrupt distribution of foods. Pag bumaha, hindi makatakbo yung sasakyan. And eventually, mental health. It affects our mental health. No? So, severity of extreme weather events, climate-influenced illness, injuries and deaths, no? Damage to homes, livelihoods, communities, and population displacement, nagkukos yun sa atin ng stress. Di ba? Nagsasuffer tayo. And it affects our mental health. No? So, the level of exposure ng mga tao to all of the above, maranasan mo lang yung Yolanda. Di ba? Meron ka ng mental health issue dyan. Baka may PTSD ka na. Climate-influenced illness, injury, and death. Nakita mo yung mga na trauma where you physically napunit ang mga katawan because of extreme weather events, makaka-apekto din yan sa atin. Nasira yung bahay mo, na yung ilang buwan mong pinagpagurang crops, no? Isang bagyo lang, tapos na, wala ka ng kinabukasan. Nakita mo yung buong community mo, wala kayong matirhan, population displacement, no? So yan ang epekto in our mental health also. So, effects on health with those environmental changes, nagkakaroon tayo ng increased respiratory and cardiovascular diseases, injuries and premature deaths related to extreme weather events. Diba? Matamaan ka ng lumilipad na yero, maputulang ka ng kamay, ng ulo, injury and trauma. So premature deaths related to extreme weather events. Malunod ka dahil sa baha sa Yolanda. Changes in the prevalence and geographical distribution of food and waterborne illness and other infectious diseases, and threats to mental health. So ito yung effects ng climate change sa ating health. No? So in summary, ito yung magiging effects ng climate change in our health. So extreme temperature, increased hospital and ER visits, heat-related illnesses and deaths, so heat cramps, heat edema, heat cramps, heat exhaustion, hanggang maging heat stroke. No? Especially the vulnerable population, yung elderly at saka yung masyadong bata na hindi pa elderly, tanda na yung katawan nila, yung masyadong bata, hindi pa adapted yung katawan nila to the insults or injuries of extreme weathers, no? Or extreme temperatures. Extreme temperatures affect people working outdoors and those who are isolated and economically disadvantaged, yung mga manggagawa natin na nakabilad sa araw, those with chronic illnesses, and communities of color. So, mas may kulay ka, mas ina-absorb mo yung temperature. So, this is talking about heat-related illnesses or injuries. The next, extreme events or natural disasters. Siyempre, tulad ng Yolanda or earthquakes, death, injuries, or illnesses. Exacerbation of underlying medical conditions. Wala kang mapuntang dialysis center dahil sarado lahat. No? So mag-exacerbate yung chronic renal failure mo and all the other diseases. Wala ka ng gamot eh. So exacerbation of underlying medical conditions. Adverse effects on mental health. Disruption of lifelines essential to maintain access to healthcare and emergency response services. So wala kang matawagang ambulansya dahil walang madaanan yung mga ambulansya. Hindi pumasok lahat ng tao because of the disaster. Nag-abandon ng post yung mga dapat tumulong sa iyo dahil victim din sila. So climate change affects our health. Air quality, we experience premature deaths, hospital ER visits for acute respiratory symptoms, pollen, allergic sensitivity or diseases, lung cancer, COPD, cardiovascular diseases, because of the air quality, because of pollution. Loss of schoolwork or work days. And then mga indoor molds nagpo-proliferate. Vector-borne diseases, of course, yung mga vector-borne diseases like malaria, dengue, filariasis, sa mga prone na areas, West Nile fever, yellow fever. So all vector-borne diseases, and one example is mosquito-borne diseases. Ano pa? Global status of major vector-borne diseases. So marami po siya. Meron ding schistosomiasis, yellow fever, leptospirosis. So these are examples of vector-borne diseases that syempre maapektuhan siya ng climate change. Waterborne diseases, so toxins from harmful algae, mga red tides natin. So that is climate-related din. Cholera, diarrhea and intestinal illnesses, wound infections. Pagka nag-wade ka sa tubig, nagasgasan ka, magiging malalayang may infect yung sugat mo actually, diba? Kasi exposed ka sa dirty water. Eye and ear infections, leptospirosis, septicemia primarily in immunocompromised persons. So ito yung mga waterborne diseases natin, and syempre death. Food supplies, sinabi ko na kanina, contaminants sa food natin, and then syempre gumagamit ka ng pesticides na harmful din actually sa atin. And yung mga mercury contaminations. Not talking about pests, parasites, and microbes na pwedeng matransport doon sa food natin. So, nagkakaroon tayo ng decrease in nutritional value ng food because of climate change, disruption in distribution, causing food damage, spoilage, or contamination, limiting access to safe and nutritious food, and foodborne illness like micronutrient deficiency and death, so malnutrition. Lastly, mental health. Stress and serious mental health consequences. Siyempre, nakikita mo yung suffering. Ikaw, nagsasuffer, nakikita mo yung paligid mo, nagsasuffer, nakikita mo yung mga karumal-dumal na nangyayari sa paligid mo because of the disaster effect by climate change. So meron kang stress and serious mental health consequences, PTSD, depression, generalized anxiety, chronic psychological dysfunction, and people with mental illness are higher risk for physical and mental health due to extreme heat. So ito po yung mga effects ng climate change naman sa ating health. And I think so in summary, this slide shows all the health effects of climate change to our body. And with that, I think my 15 minutes is over. And thank you very much. So I hand back the floor to Doc Raymond and Doc Susie.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Nako, ang ganda. Palakpakan naman natin ang presentation, no? My goodness, it's one of those presentations that you want to keep doing. Talagang very broad very broad overview. And this really shows us how complicated this is. Na it's not one or two things, no? Everything gets affected, including our physiology, including the animals, the insects, and so on. Marami tayong pag-uusapan, but thank you so much, Charlie, for that excellent presentation. Raymond, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Susie. And thank you again, Professor Charlie. May professor in my MHA. We'll see each other po sa Q&A mamaya, Dr. Charlie. Just to remind everyone po, no, for our Q&A session, we will choose po yung most upvoted questions. So if you could find the time, type it in dito po sa Q&A box na dito po sa ilalim ng ating Zoom. So that it could be seen already by our experts po, no? And for our audience, if your question is selected, you will receive a message from our team inviting you to be part of the panel para kayo po ay makapagtanong ng direkta sa ating mga experts. So we encourage everyone to already start typing in your questions in the Zoom Q&A and also in the comment section po ng TVUP Facebook and YouTube channel po and the page po. Okay, so it's my pleasure naman po to introduce our next speaker, very first time to join us. She's an obstetrician, gynecologist, and OBGYN sonologist. Holds the rank of Professor 5 and attending physician with the UP Philippine General Hospital, and also serves as the chair of the Subcommittee on Climate Change and Disaster Risk Preparedness of the Committee on Environment and Women's Health with the Philippine Obstetrical and Gynecological Society. Please welcome to the webinar, Dr. Erlidia Llamas-Clark.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd just like to share my screen. Thank you for your kind introduction, Doc Raymond and Doc Susie. Can you see now my screen? Thank you.
There we go. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'll begin. So I'm very fortunate to be invited here, no? And as I said, it is a pleasure to be able to contribute. I declare no conflict of interest. I think you've introduced me already with my work with the POGs. Of course, I'd like to actually say why an obstetrician gynecologist ended up in the climate change space. No, I did not really start early. No, I'd like to introduce myself in that regard so that you know where I would come from. No, so the residency program of PGH, as part of that in the early 90s, and I just was really wondering, we were receiving too many low birth weight neonates, all problematic pregnancies, and a lot of maternal morbidity and mortality. But it has not really changed all these preventable diseases, and we have good doctors, specialists. These preventable causes remains to be a problem even today. No, so what could be the factors? We ask people, no, and we determine sometimes it's poverty, lack of access to health services, but maybe it's really important to look at our public health systems and understand our environment, our social determinants of health. Particularly, this is a very essential part of being healthy. So you'll see here in the picture my time in Kiribati, an atoll country, which is the epicenter of climate change. It is a country in the middle of the Pacific, and at the time, my gap year took me to be a UN volunteer, and at that stage, firsthand climate change was staring at me. It wasn't fashionable to talk about climate change because they were talking about family planning, sexual reproductive health, and HIV/AIDS. But to me, it taught me so many things. No? The small pretty islands reminded me that this deep blue sea, they're rising. And at some point, I may not even be able to go back or see it where I live. It may disappear because of climate change. However, the world was not really bothered at most, and sun rises and sets. But now, fast forward, after doing some research on it, extreme weather events and child malnutrition, here I am. I'm an advocate of climate change and disaster risk preparedness. So these are the objectives of my lecture. No? So my presentation, I'd like to link climate change and reproductive and women's health, and specifically look at it from the point of view of pregnancy and fertility, and also at this point in our environment where we have the current pandemic. this is the outline of my presentation. And over the last 2.5 years, the foundations of human society, essentially the health system and world economy, has been challenged by this pandemic. And all the public health agenda even have been taken over by COVID, including climate change. But nature has shown us that climate-related disasters cannot really be avoided, and we still experience a lot of natural hazards like typhoon and its consequent flooding becoming more intense and frequent, and it really affects reproductive and women's health, pregnancy and fertility. And at this time, we really have to reflect and ask ourselves, what is our response in the health sector? So here's the big conceptual framework of how global environmental change will affect health in general and reproductive health and women's health in particular. This is a socio-ecological perspective, and the understanding of our bigger systems is really important in the discussion, because we are all affected in many, many ways, as discussed by Doc Charlie. So directly, we will have the direct impacts, and indirectly, all of these things will be either socially and economically mediated, that we really need to be aware of, because it's not only about disruption of our ecological systems. So I'd like you to think about the changing seasons in the pollination of plants, and it has its effect in terms of our food security, an effect of climate change. But to me, as an obstetrician, births and deaths are also associated with some seasonality. So essentially, we all depend on climate change, and there's really not too much of a bother for us, because it's really something that has been naturally occurring over many years. And the past 200 years, it was pretty good. But the quick acceleration of these high temperature changes is the one that is really bothering us, because it has gone into point, it coincided with the Industrial Revolution and all the goods and services that we are demanding of, essentially are making us produce more. And in the last 50 years, the increasing population, as well as our hunger for coal-derived fuel, is fueling this climate change faster than what is expected. So what does it mean now for reproductive health? So all of these, as discussed, are interconnected, and we now have to be cognizant of the fact that as healthcare workers, we need to respond in a way, because we will be part of that healthcare services system when all these health impacts happen. So in reproductive health, I'd like to take you through the framework of the WHO and focus on matters that are related to reproductive system and its functions. So here, a life cycle perspective is very important, from womb to tomb. So bearing in mind that the RH goals, our reproductive health goals, are really something that is by choice. So the choices sometimes of couples will depend on their household and what they are able to bring on the table in terms of food security, or are they forced to migrate to different place so that they'll be able to decide how many children that they have, or maybe not even have at any point, not have any children at all. So I'm just showing you here that all of the health impacts, whether physical or psychological, happen because of climate change, and they drive the force of how couples actually have reproductive choices. So it is something that is not very well studied, and research must come in so that we can understand fairly what's going on with the reproductive health choices of our people. So what does it mean now in terms of its relationship to population? So we all know that reproductive health can influence population size and growth. It will act as a multiplier to factors and it matters to future emission. The bigger the population, there is an increase in consumption. We may be using technology to offset it, but it is very detrimental to our environment because it can become unsustainable. So as the global temperatures rise, the impacts of climate change increases. It also means more pollutants, having some fossil fuel plants, smoke from wildfires also degrades air quality. These scenarios mean that we're going to have a lot of health risk in all of us, but of course at-risk population, particularly pregnant women and their offspring. And this is our future generation. So we need to protect pretty much at all costs our women and children. So now I ask, okay, so what then is the effect of climate change in pregnancy? So the effects of pregnancy, well, I'll take you back. Pregnancy brings physical and psychological changes, and essentially this maternal offspring neuroendocrine relationship that is tightly regulated can be upset by environmental disturbances during pregnancy, and you can have long-term or short-term consequences. And to discuss this, we have direct impacts and indirect impacts. The indirect impacts can be either from the natural environment or via the social environment path, as I said. So these are complex and they can occur simultaneously. They can have synergistic action to pregnancy health. So what I'd like you to know, though, is that the International Federation of Gynecologists and Obstetricians and their 130 countries and territories national societies, they have adopted a precautionary principle, implying that there is a social responsibility to protect the public from exposure to harm when scientific investigation has found a plausible risk. So international research and the medical community are one. There is a consensus that the current climate crisis presents an imminent health risk to pregnant women, the developing fetus, and reproductive health. So in the latest IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change this year, they confirmed that increasing temperatures and heat will give us higher rates of preterm births, low birth weight, stillbirth, and neonatal stress. And extreme weather events are actually driving reduced access to prenatal care. So going to the direct impacts, what happens when a pregnant woman is exposed to extreme temperature or even very cold events? So we understand that heat events are defined as a series of unusual hot days, and globally, we are experiencing increasing trends, including the Philippines. So pregnant women are more prone to heat stress compared to non-pregnant women, and the mechanism really is about changed thermoregulation and metabolism during pregnancy. So acute and chronic exposures to heat will impact pregnancy. However, at this stage, we do not really know the periods of sensitivity yet. So what we know of in terms of cold events is that there's also some decreased birth weight. We can have association of preterm births with hot weather conditions, and increase in temperature was also implicated in having preterm birth rate. Interestingly, we see a lot of hypertension in pregnancy, eclampsia and pre-eclampsia, and they occur in both cold and humid seasons, sometimes in the wet. But interestingly, that's something that we are seeing here in the Philippines, and we really haven't done a lot of exploration on this, no? So in terms of heat and cold, extreme temperatures in relation to preterm birth, the US has been leading in this, and between 1989 to 2002, across 408 counties, they have a 32 million live singleton births, and they demonstrated extreme heat was more strongly associated with preterm birth in regions with colder and drier climates and among younger women. Also, they showed that cold temperature days were associated with lower preterm births. So essentially what it's saying is that there is some protective effect maybe, but as I said, we're not really sure, and in our setting here in the Philippines, we need to explore and have more research. In terms of birth weight, temperature extremes are also associated with lower birth weight. Mechanism of this is increasing oxidative stress and systemic inflammation in response to temperature changes during gestation. So we are also cognizant of the fact that the Z scores, they actually investigated on this and showed that like both in the warmer than average and the colder than average temperature during pregnancy, they found low birth weight Z scores for this. So still it's kind of mixed, no? So we need to look at this further. Ambient temperature or the prevailing temperature was also explored to have association with birth weight. And again, it's mixed findings. So the direction really of all these is having to have more research in climate change, pregnancy associations of, health impacts of climate change and even disasters. So what we're saying here is that while birth weight is very important as a marker of fetal growth, then we need to actually look at other causes as well, because as you know, it's a multifactorial thing. No, you have to look at it from the point of view of also bringing in genetics, lifestyle habits, socioeconomic factors, and the like. So what about typhoons and hurricanes? So the frequency of this, we know that it is increasing in intensity around the world, but even so here in our country. So during a typhoon and flooding incident, women will fear losing their home, jobs, worry about their baby, pregnancy and delivery, and women and children also, as I found in my study, that they are food insecure. And when I did this study, this was at the time of Ondoy and Pepeng, and even after 18 months post-disaster, our women and children are actually very food insecure, and the children ended up like with wasting and stunting. So adverse maternal health outcomes, fetal outcomes, are hypertension in pregnancy, labor and birth complications, having cesarean sections, fetal death, and neonatal complications. So when we think about these tropical cyclones related to preterm birth, what we know of is that there's a problem with exposure, exposure assessment. The method that people are using are still something to be refined. But one of the studies here that used like peak sustained wind speed and distance to storm track and cumulative rainfall of tropical cyclones as a definition of exposure showed that preterm births the mothers are affected by preterm births. So also floods are commonly occurring with typhoons and hurricanes. So it's harder to independently evaluate them. But all these unintentional distribution of hazardous chemicals also affect our moms and children. All these endocrine disruptors, plastics and pollutants, food insecurity that was discussed earlier because of decreased food access and availability, food quality, pregnancy and maternal and fetal complications may happen not only in the immediate but also in the long term when you do a surveillance, particularly of their growth. In the US, there is a very good documentation of all the effects on pregnancy, and they found that there is increase in preterm birth, higher low birth weight, and also in one of the states there, they showed that those houses with some damages also had increased fetal deaths. And what are we doing? So here in the Philippines, as I said, like the POGS Environment and Women's Health Subcommittee, we have volunteer registry of obstetrician gynecologists who would go out to the regions and respond and become also advisors in the technical working groups with local government units. So in terms of air quality, a systematic review of studies found about 32 million births were studied here, increased risk of preterm deaths, low birth weights, and they were particularly seen in those with asthma and Afro-American mothers, and stillbirth was also found to be increased. Again, we have a lot to look at in terms of the Philippines and research in these areas of climate change health impacts. Food security as well and water security. For climate-related disasters, all that has been said about access, a lot of lost productivity, food distribution channels, low food supply can lead to food scarcity and undernutrition. So exposure to pesticides in food and the pesticide drift can also inadvertently affect the health of our mothers and babies. So in terms of water security, the world has about 1 billion people with no access to clean and safe water. So pregnant women from low socioeconomic groups are affected and are at risk of dehydration, low birth weight, and preterm births. And contamination of the water means that they can also consume this and then have ill health. So the shifts in vectors and pathogen, as any body where you are actually going to have wider distribution with warming temperatures and impending water shortage, you'll be exposed to this as well. No, but more so, pregnant women can get infested and infected with possible miscarriage, IUGR, preterm delivery, septicemia, and even like parasites like ascariasis can abound. No, so going further, fertility is the capability to produce children, and climate change has effect in this as well. Globally, the trend of fertility rates are declining, and some suggest that some climate change as a factor or its health consequences are driving this trend. So hot weather may have impact on sexual activity. As people are saying, it's physically demanding. So if you are exposed to high temperatures, then it becomes problematic. Increasing temperature also has the potential to have detrimental impact on reproductive health factors as sperm motility and menstruation. And these are the basic things that we need to have in terms of physiology to be able to have pregnancy. No, so effect of climate change on fertility, negative effect on fertility and birth rates. So climate change drives temperature up, increases the number and severity of heat waves. So getting pregnant may be harder. Also, sperm production and quality is affected. So one of the studies that were put forth is that there was a large decline in birth rates even 8 to 10 months later when you are exposed to hot days. So a partial rebound was seen in this. If you are a woman of less than 35 years of age in that community, maybe you will be able to catch up. However, the hot weather most likely harms reproductive health. What they're suggesting is that as a way of counteracting physical activity in terms of sexual activity, they suggest also air conditioning to offset the fertility cost of high temperatures. However, we have to remember that even the air conditioning that we have produces carbon and adds up to carbon emissions. So effect of climate change and fertility, there's a socioeconomic model. Potential for climate change to impact fertility can be adapted in human behavior. So essentially, a study looked at Colombia and Switzerland, and they're looking at reducing fertility and increasing education in richer northern countries at this point. And what they found that increasing fertility as well and reducing education in poorer tropical countries. What's the implication of this? What they found is that like some couples are actually choosing to have fewer children and investing on maybe quality of children, particularly if you are from the higher socioeconomic status, either countries or communities. But if you are coming from the mainly agricultural traditional, it's like more quantity, more children, so that they can help out and offset some of the livelihood needs, no, that you want to actually get out, but unfortunately they are a little bit more unskilled. So the connection between climate change and COVID-19 at this stage, no direct connection, and the emergence of the transmission of the COVID-19 disease perhaps has really at this point have no bearing, but it's not clear-cut compared to the changing patterns and spread of other vector-borne diseases like dengue and malaria. But who knows? Because essentially, we are still in the pandemic. Evolving knowledge may link this between climate change and COVID-19. So pre-pandemic, what are we expecting in terms of climate change and COVID pandemic now that it's upon us? The pre-pandemic and current situation will worsen. I don't want to sound so pessimistic, but without any mitigation and adaptation strategies that will address the root cause, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and reducing adverse impacts, taking advantage of the potential benefits to health if we already transfer to renewables and clean energy, it's not going to be very positive for the world. So research is evolving for COVID-19 effects on fertility and pregnancy, the negative impact of COVID-19 disease in testicular function, sperm production, and male fertility are being documented at this point, and the presence of semen in the presence of SARS-CoV-2 in semen is demonstrated in one of the studies, and it will affect the hypothalamic pituitary testicular axis. Oxidative stress and hypogonadism may occur after COVID infection. What's the implication of that? We don't know. There's again a wide ocean of information to be digested here. The most common theory as well that's circulating around in terms of vaccination is that there are some way of the virus being able to attack proteins in the placenta, but the evidence is not conclusive. So implications and recommendations on how to address climate change. First, we agree to action. Every one of us will be affected. Climate change presents grave risks that demand society's urgent attention. We need to adapt to this change, cut our greenhouse gas emissions, and support policies and laws for low carbon and renewables in the future. We need to also put the needs of the poorest and the most vulnerable, not only in our country, but in the world, because those that are actually using less or producing less carbon emissions are the ones who are suffering. So we need to have consumption that is tempered. Climate change is a problem of personal consumption as well. So we need to actually ask ourselves, are we living simply, using basic and essential goods with our food choices? Are we, adding to it our use of the water, making use of natural products, using less fuel, like walking or biking and traveling less, maybe having an efficient living by transferring to smaller houses and having less clutter and recycling and reusing things. So where to from here? We have now known that climate change will have direct and indirect impacts to fertility and pregnancy. It's already a vulnerable population. And of course, if you belong to the low socioeconomic countries, then it becomes dire. The implications to future health and survival of the next generation is at stake here. There's a great need for health professionals to advocate on a large scale the cause of climate change and the need of the health sector to work with other sectors and disciplines. How? I think there has to be an open dialogue with everybody, and not operating in silos would be a good start. Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much. And for your future action, we hope that everything will work out for the whole of humanity. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Dr. Lee. Nako, one of those fantastic presentations again. Ayan, makikita mo lahat yung mga hearts and mga clapping. Ang galing din mo.
Yeah, that's true.
You might expecting sa reproductive health, no? So, ang daming mga impact. Anyway, let's go to our next speaker, Raymond. Our next speaker, we have not met him before, but I think you're gonna enjoy his talk. He's a vascular and endovascular surgeon, but he specializes in aviation and aerospace physiology. And he is the aviation medical examiner faculty of the Department of Physiology of the UP College of Medicine. So we'd like to welcome our reactor, Professor Ricardo Quintos. Dr. Quintos, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you very much. Magandang umaga, magandang hapon, magandang gabi sa ating mga tagapakinig, and maraming salamat po, Dr. Suseng, for that very nice introduction. And I'd also like to say thank you to Chancellor Padilla, who personally invited me to come to this forum. I've been watching this forum very regularly, and I find it to be a very how do I say, straightforward, truthful, and honest representation of information that we really need at this time, no? Yung hindi fake news, talagang tunay ang sinasabi natin. And also, I would like to say thank you to the organizers for having this platform. So I was being asked to also give my reaction to the first two speakers, and I congratulate them for giving a very complex topic, no, a very understandable treatment, no, na talagang naiintindihan nating lahat na tungkol dun sa pangyayari sa climate change, kung paano tayo naapektuhan, at paano rin na anong mga pwede nating magawa, lalo na in terms of the social aspect, in terms of the community aspect, and ito kay Dr. Ali, no, yung kung ano ang pwede nating gawin tungkol dyan sa reproductive and health aspect. Siguro ang gusto ko lang maipudagdag, no, dahil dito sa mga natutunan ko sa inyo, and gusto kong sabihin sa inyo na in my field as a physiologist, no, I deal so much with the physiology, no, how does our bodies react to extremes in environment, extremes in stresses, and that is why I was working in aviation medicine and also in aerospace medicine. And we know that our bodies, no, will only work very well, no, within a certain range of temperature. So kung hindi tayo nasa loob ng temperature na yon, that range of temperatures, then we fall into sickness, then we fall into dysfunction. And that is why I think what I can add here to this discussion is ano ba ang pwedeng mangyari sa atin individually in our health, no, with regards to this climate change effects, no? And secondly, what can we do? What does our body do that we don't really need to think about, because our body can adapt to certain situations? And what does our body do to adapt, no, to these changing environmental stresses? And kung hindi natin magawa na ang body natin ang mag-adapt to that, what can our own behaviors do to adapt to these changing environmental stresses? And finally, not as individual, what can we as a community do, no, to adapt to these changes in the environment? So definitely, our premise here is meron talagang changes in the environment. Climate change is happening, no? Even if we understand it to be that, if you look at the climate history of the world, no, the last 10,000 years where the humans started to come out, we are relatively in a warm period. Ang tawag natin yung Holocene period. Pero before that, there was this ice age. Wala pang humans nun. Ngayon, in this warm period, that is where the humans came out. And within that Holocene period, merong mga ups and downs, may mga changes talaga. But recently, in this past few decades, talagang nakikita natin na talagang paap lang yung temperature. And this is really happening not because of only the actual cycles of temperature of the global patterns, but also because of human activity, human effects. So how do we adjust to that physiologically? Sa atin, ang katawan natin, we adjust in a number of ways. The first is our body is more than 60-75% water, and water is a very good buffer. And that is why life survived. Because life as we know it survived because of water. Kaya nga ngayon yung mga naghahanap ng life elsewhere in other planets, unang hahanapin nila, kung gusto natin makahanap ng life na katulad sa atin, maghanap tayo ng planeta na may tubig. Why? Because water has been a very important a component to serve as a buffer against wide variations. Water can be a buffer for in wide variations of temperature. Kahit mainit sa labas, malamig sa labas, sa loob natin, the temperature remains relatively constant because of the water buffer. So that is one very nice aspect of physiology that makes us adjust to these varying fluctuations in temperature. Secondly, ngayon, kung meron a temperature is tending to rise and our water buffer is not enough to counteract the changes in temperature, whether rising or lowering, nagkakaroon din tayo ng mechanisms to adjust. May meron tayong adaptations in our body, and that is why our water buffer can adjust to changes in 1 to 2 degrees centigrade, and our mechanisms, our autonomic mechanisms, can adjust to a little wider range in temperature changes, and much of these adaptations have to do with our nervous system dilating the blood vessels near our skin so that we will radiate the heat out into the environment, and it will also stimulate the sweat glands to sweat out remove water, and this evaporating effect of the water is what is cooling us down when we're exposed to certain degrees of heat. And ganun din naman on the other extreme, pag lumalamig naman, our bodies will also have certain mechanisms to adjust to these temperatures. But that being said, meron ding range na hanggang dun lang din, and the normal range is probably about what they say is kung sa sobrang init, dapat ang internal temperature natin hanggang mga 39.5 or 40 degrees Celsius ang upper range na we can still function physiologically, and up to 35 degrees, 36 to 35 degrees centigrade on the lower register. So beyond that, our mechanisms cannot adjust anymore. And so before our internal temperature, internal thermostats can reach, can detect that, it will tell us subconsciously and maybe even consciously that we need to do something to maintain our temperature. And so that happens. Nagkakaroon ng mga behavioral aspects. So we feel hot, so we remove our clothes, we try to wet ourselves, we feel thirsty, so we drink to replenish the fluids, and then we look for another place. Sisilong tayo, hahanap tayo ng mga shelter to get away from the heat or to go into a cooler place. So we will move. Those are some of the behavioral patterns. With regards to the cold, ganun din. Kung nilalamigan, the behavioral patterns would be to put on more clothes, to seek for a warmer climate, to burrow, to dig, to magtataklob. So they're the behavioral patterns. Individually, those are some of the responses. But if those responses are not enough to restore the balance or the temperature within ourselves, then that's when illness sets in. And that's why we have such a thing now as health illness. And that health illness is the spectrum of symptoms and the spectrum of symptoms and signs that we have to recognize, being frontliners, not only in ourselves but also in other people, in order for us to be able to treat them and to restore the balance of the body. So ano ba itong spectrum na to? Ang spectrum na to is the health illness or health injuries. First, beginning with heat rash. Yung heat rash, you will see that as red clusters of small blisters in your skin, parang siguro mga just not yet sunburn, pero it looks like pimples. Yung nakikita nating butlig-butlig, nakikita natin yan mostly in young children because they are more sensitive, they have not yet adapted to extremes in higher ranges of temperature. Kaya magkakaroon ka ng heat rash, kaya you will see that as one initial symptom or sign, no, of heat illness. And then going up, you will get this sunburn, no, the painful red warm skin. You have these blisters, a sunburn, and then later on, heat cramps. Heat cramps naman, mainit na hindi lang yung sa labas, pati yung sa loob mo. No, your muscles will be feeling cramps, and you will be experiencing heavy sweating during intense exercise, or even just regular exercise if the temperature is really going higher. And you will have muscle pain and muscle cramps. And then what is worse than heat cramps later on is you come into heat exhaustion. This is now not just localized in certain parts of your body. Your whole body now gets into heat exhaustion. You are profusely sweating, your body trying to cool itself down. You have cold, pale, clammy skin, and because of all this sweat on your skin, they're trying to cool your skin. And you have a fast, weak pulse. You start to experience GI upset. You get nauseous, and you start to vomit. You get muscle cramps, tiredness, and the weakness, dizziness, headaches, and fainting and passing out. But the important thing is, this is still relatively, this is an urgent thing to recognize, and you can still correct this without having long-lasting deleterious effects, because the body is still really accommodating and trying to fix itself. Pero pag hindi na niya kaya mag-fix ng sarili niya, what will happen is that is called the heat stroke. Heat stroke, the difference thing with heat exhaustion and heat stroke, ang taas ng temperature ng body, and the body, the skin is so hot, but it's dry. The skin is dry. There is no sweat. The pulse is so rapid and strong because the sympathetic mechanisms kick in, and it is making the heart beat faster. The patient will be delirious, no? You will have headache. The patient is wala na sa sarili, is incapable of making very important decisions. Medyo nagbabomit na siya. There's confusion, and eventually there could be a loss of consciousness and passing out. So the heat stroke is now the severe end of the spectrum of this health illness. So as frontliners, it is very important for us now that we are in this climate change to recognize these symptoms and these signs of health illness, so that we can know what to do. And basically, what we can do for these patients when it comes to this spectrum of illnesses is to try to help the body restore the balance. Ibalik natin siya dun sa equilibrium and sa homeostasis. And the first thing that we need to do is to really, kung yung environment is the source of the heat, alisin siya sa environment. Kung nasa init siya, alisin siya sa init. Kung mainit siya, ilamig siya, balutan sa malamig. Try to bring down the temperature as fast as possible. Why? Because temperature, the extremes of temperature becomes damaging. Like I said, the range at the high range is at 40 degrees centigrade. Pag tumaas ka na ng 41 with a sustained 41 degrees, permanent neurological damage can occur, no? And especially in this individual. And I was very happy that there was also some discussion by Dr. Ali about the in pregnancy, and not only for the pregnant woman, but also for the patient, the fetus. In the fetus, there are some certain considerations for the fetus, because the fetus does not have these adaptations yet. No, their adaptations are not yet mature, and they do not have this range of physiological adaptations to this heat. And in fact, the intrauterine environment is very protective. Pero if a mother is febrile or is subjected to heat stroke in temperatures of 41, the intrauterine environment is generally 1 degree higher than the mother's temperature, core temperature of the mother. So kung nagpo-40 na ang mother, ang intrauterine temperature is already 41 for the fetus. Unfortunately, the fetus will already have permanent neurologic damage at only 39. No, yan ang mga sinasabi sa mga studies. No, so mothers should be more, pregnant women should be more aggressive, no, in treating this hyperthermia. No, don't let it reach up to 40, because when you are 40, your fetus is already feeling a 41, and there's already permanent damage that's going to happen to the developing nervous system at 39. So these are some of the things that will happen to us as individuals, and I would like to emphasize, no, that as individuals, there are things that we can do for us to prevent these damage from happening. As individuals, we also have behavioral strategies to try to correct the heat, and not just for us, but also for the community, to mitigate the effects of climate change for the community. And later on, maybe in the question and answer portion, I'll be glad to answer what is it that the community has done in the past when there have been episodes of heat, of warmer periods. No, we learn from them, and maybe we can learn from them again in this coming heat climate change. Just like we learned from the last pandemic 100 years ago, na cyclical siya, and then we learned what to do. There were also past episodes of heat increases in the climate, and the community as a whole responded to it, and maybe we can learn from it. So I think I'd like to stop here and have the time now for the question and answer portions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ricardo Quintos. Again, another lesson for all of us. We're going to watch this again. I want to watch it again. I mean, maganda yung explanation yun. And I think very accessible for us. We could understand the physiology behind it. Okay, Raymond, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Susie, and thank you so much, Dr. Quintos, who was my professor in physiology. Thank you again, sir, for serving as reactor for our webinar for today. Please stay on for our Q&A session, and at this point, we're gonna ask the rest of the panel to please switch on your videos so we can begin our Q&A session shortly. But before that, we'll take a very quick break for our special public service announcement for today.
Ay, ate, gusto ko nang lumabas at makipaglaro.
Eh di ba magkakasakit daw tayo kapag lumabas?
Magpe-face mask naman ako eh.
Kahit na, hanggat wala daw tayong injection, hindi tayo pwedeng lumabas at maglaro.
Ano ba yan? Takot pa naman ako sa injection.
Huwag ka mag-alala. Parang kagat lang daw ng langgam yun.
Talaga? Eh natatakot pa rin ako.
Eh di sabay na lang tayo.
Pa-injection?
Oo, syempre. Loves kita eh. Para makapaglaro na tayo.
Dahil mahal ko kayo, magpapabakuna ako.
Kaya mga bata, magpabakuna na kayo.
Stay safe and stay well. Mga bata, magpasama na sa Bakuna Center. Thank you so much, TVUP. The Stop COVID Deaths webinar series team is pushing for the pediatric vaccination of children aged 5 to 18 years old, and this COVID communications public service announcement is just one of the many creative outputs of the team, and we hope you'll be able to share this message to everyone. Please go ahead and share this video clip in all your social media networks po, no? Stay safe and stay well, at sana po magpapasama na po kayo sa Bakuna Center. We also know that you're very busy individuals po, no? So, part of what we offer to you are very short consumable videos, which we call SCD Shorts. You can go to youtube.com/TVUPPH for you to be able to watch these nuggets of wisdom po, very, very short videos that we have prepared as part of our Stop COVID Deaths webinar series. Over to you, Dr. Susie.
Okay, thank you very much, Raymond, and thank you so much to our panel for taking the time and really preparing. You know, our experts always come very well prepared with their slide deck and all. So just to start, and I saw a number of questions, Raymond, from the Q&A box, and I think there are some also on the live stream. But yeah, I wanted to ask our panelists. Okay, so here we are, right? We are in the middle already of a unstable or destabilized climate situation. In the context of the Philippines, what do you think our students of medicine, nursing, the allied medical professions, what should we be preparing for? So I know that it's everything and it could be anything, but in your experience, what do you think is the kind of like top of mind kind of everybody should know about this, because this is going to increase, or this condition is going to be really debilitating. So we're going to start with let's see, Charlie, ikaw muna.
So can you repeat again the question, Ma'am Susie? Ano yung yung dapat tandaan ng students natin in terms of climate change and health?
Ano yung what do we have to prepare for? Kumbaga, sa lahat ng sa lahat ng problema, kasi Charlie, you gave us a very broad presentation of the different effects, possible effects on health. But for the Philippines, what do you think is the thing that we need to be most prepared for?
Ang mga na-experience po kasi natin na regularly per year is yung mga extreme events, yung mga typhoons, at saka yung increased rain and flooding siguro. So yun siguro yung yung pwede nating pagtuunan ng pansin. No? Of course, hindi natin maalis din yung effects sa food and others, no? Pero since kung related sa disasters and ito yung regularly occurring at tumitindi yung rainfall at saka yung strength of wind ng typhoon natin, I think siguro ito yung pwede nating pagtuunan ng pansin in terms of health, no? So ano yung mga effects nito in terms of our community, no? Pwede ba nating iwasan? And then syempre, paano tayo magre-respond kung ano yung mga injuries or diseases na dinulot nito sa mga kababayan natin, no? Para in terms
Charlie, kasi no, I kind of agree, no. But of course we're gonna ask Lee and Ricky about this. But we're 70% of the population lives on the coastline. And apparently yung sea level rise natin is about 4% higher than the rest of the world. So I think what you're saying, no, is effects of typhoon and flooding, yun talaga yata, and everything related to that, no? So yun talaga yung yun lalo siyang lalala. But I'm thinking, right, if that's the case, let's think about our hospitals and our health centers that are near coastlines. Dapat ba iniisip na nating ilipat yung mga yan?
Ang problema po kasi natin, wala na tayong space to begin with, Lahat ng cities natin congested na kasi nandun yung kabuhayan, no? And then pag inaalis mo yung mga tao dun sa danger zones, after ng disaster, di ba, bumabalik din sila doon, hindi mo rin sila mapipigilan.
Pero why do we say na hindi natin mapigilan? Hindi kaya pwede yung after each disaster, let's say an area floods, you declare it uninhabitable. Hindi na pwedeng bumalik. Kasi that's for the protection of people, di ba? Parang I don't know. I'm just thinking na if we know that things repeat, certain conditions repeat in certain areas, hindi na dapat natin pinapayagan yun. We should be looking for higher ground, hindi kaya ganon.
Actually, yan nga po yung paradox kung tutuusin, Ihalin tulad na lang po siguro natin sa sa Marikina Valley Fault Line. Alam na nating danger zone na siya, bakit hindi natin mapaalis yung mga tao?
Well, and that's what I'm saying, parang hindi, like if there's a disaster, then you can't go back. That's what I'm saying. Kasi it's difficult really to move people if there's no threat. Diba? Kasi parang pinapaalis, wala naman nangyayari. Pero pag may nangyari, dapat hindi na pwedeng balikan. Anyway, we're just discussing. So Lee, what do you think? Sige, Charlie, ikaw muna.
Example na lang po ulit yung sa yung sa Mayon, 'di ba? Nagkaroon tayo ng Typhoon Durian dati na naulit yung Kagsawa na nagkaroon ng ash flow. And then wala pang 2 linggo, nagtatayo na naman yung mga tao ng bahay doon sa danger zone, So ganun po talaga
Ay, naku, I don't accept that, Charlie. Parang I don't think ganun talaga. I think if our mentality is that that climate is now like a permanent, it's a permanent issue already for us, then we have to change the way we do things, no? Parang kasi iba na yun, parang dati, okay, so umuulit, ganon. Pero ngayon, we're seeing increased frequency, increased intensity, and then increase in increase in the duration, the shortening of the duration, frequency nga pala yun. Oo. So anyway, let me ask Lee. Lee, what do you think we should be preparing for most?
Well, thank you, Ma'am Susan. No? I'm going towards, from Charlie's sinasabi niya yung disaster pa ulit-ulit, tapos no, the people just go back. And I would really go a bit further upstream, no? Because I think we already know the vulnerability of our people, our country, and I think it has to go up where, yun nga meron ng studies, political, medyo we will enter into the political sphere, no? Because, and this is a touchy issue because in a study, I would invoke a study, no, of UP Econ. This was about yung mga geophysical attributes, correlates of disasters, no, and what it means to our development, including health. They already found that it is very problematic, and we're getting a lot of negative health outcomes as well in those areas where we have frequent extreme events, or even just the regular, typhoon flooding, no? Every year, 20 typhoons and floods come to the Philippines, but paulit-ulit lang. Because I think to be able to do that, entails a lot of coordination, and the Philippines has that structure, except that hindi lahat yon nai-implement, no, consistently. And of course, yun nga po, sinasabi ko nga, it can be very political in many ways, because kapag tinanggal mo sila, alam na natin na gano'n na yung problema dun sa tabing ilog or kung saan sila nabaha. Aalis lang sila sandali, tapos babalik na naman sila, tapos after a while hindi na, no? So I think it takes a lot of planning and coordination, the whole of society approach, kasi part of it is economics, no? And the thing is, kung saan may livelihood, babalik talaga sila doon. Pero we are only repeating things kasi hazardous na yung environment na yon talaga. So the planning itself, I don't want to toss it to the politicians, but they really have a lot of a big role to play in all this, kasi sila yung magi-implement ng mga polisiya. So one of the things that has to be done is for the citizenry, even us, no, we have to really support the laws. As I said, the laws and the policies that are put forth out there should be really pro-environment, pro-health. We need to capitalize on the health benefits that we can get out of, like, changing, for example, doon sa mga ways na hindi naman siya okay in the long term. Because the thing is, people's memory, no, when it comes to this disaster, very short term. Pag natapos yung isa, okay, survival mode na naman, balik na naman tayo sa dating gawe. But paulit-ulit talaga yan. It's been predicted and we know the science, but human behavior is really problematic because may mga barriers. So for me, even for the health workers, say you asked Ma'am Susan about yung mga medical students, no? We really need to also, like, give them that understanding that this is really, as you said, the biggest existential. It's not only about our public health, existential of humanity, no? Humankind is at stake here. So if we're going to be bothered eventually, diba? Kasi health services lagi parang tayong tinatawagan. Nagkakaroon din naman ng shortage ng mga health workforce, no? We have to really make aware, and each of us can be great public opinion leaders from that perspective, kasi we have organizations, no, health professional organizations that can really impress on, say, government, or even in your small communities, no. Alam naman natin how to work on it. Sometimes it's easier said than done, but yun talaga ang direction, because we have been talking about this since, as you said, 1992, all of these things are known, but like we have not really pushed forward. And for the Philippines, unfortunately, we are not getting any better at it. Yung iba, marami ng gains, of course, since Ondoy. We had a lot of improvement from Ondoy, which is the biggest disaster because it hit the central core of the Philippines. No, when Manila got hit, even Makati CBD flooded. That's what happened. Biglang nag-react, no? But it's not only just reactionary. We really have to make sure that we are sustaining this, no? All of the local government units like MMDA knew already these flood hazards even 20 years before that Ondoy happened, but did not act on it. So the role of the academe is really very big, to be able to input that knowledge and information. So this platform essentially that we are doing, even for COVID, it's a glimpse, as I'm saying. The COVID pandemic was a glimpse of what is going to be the future. Because climate change and COVID pandemic, if you look at what's going to be its track, it's very similar. The similar health effects eventually. So the health system, it has to be improved. It's very frail. And we discovered that. We thought we are great because we have medical specialists and people who are on the ground. We have a lot of brains, but the problem is the way to process that system in a way where everybody will really work together towards that one goal, because that's the hard part. And I'm not really sure I can give you straight answers when it comes to that, but you look at all the health effects, they're all interconnected. Complex world problems need complex, reframing of how to do it, from a framework of not singular, silo, single discipline. We have to really make it a little bit more multidisciplinary because it's messy. But that's real world. Thank you, Ma'am Susan.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. I mean, I like what you said about COVID is like it's like a glimpse. It gives you a glimpse of what we're gonna face with extreme climate conditions. But I'm kind of, thinking maybe we haven't said enough about the fact that before, okay, paulit-ulit, okay, but now with climate change as a driving force, it's getting worse, and therefore we can't do what we were doing before or accept that. That's not acceptable, eh. Kasi parang parang kaya sabi ko nga parang when we see disasters now, we should not allow people to go back. We have to really relocate individuals, and we can no longer say that hindi sila susunod eh. Kailangan sumunod eh. Kailangan sumunod kasi kung hindi mamamatay eh. Yun yung point doon. I'm currently in Hawaii, right? And here the beaches are open to the public. You cannot create a private beach. It's all owned by the public. And you cannot build near it. Kasi alam nilang may threat yun eh. Mga isla rin tayo eh, no? Parang I think this is really a good time to move everything 3 or 4 or 5 kilometers away from the coast, especially health facilities. Di ba? So sabihin natin hindi natin ma-move yung mga communities. We should not have health facilities that are close to the coast. Because pag ganon, pag natamaan yun, wala nang pupuntahan yung mga tao. So that's part of the resilience. Anyway, Ricky, over to you. What do you think?
Thank you very much, Dr. Susie, and I enjoyed the discussions of Dr. Kaloy and Dr. Lee. No? Para sa akin naman, I think ano ang gusto kong message, no, for our viewers, for our students, for everyone here, is that we really should have the attitude of we should not have the attitude of it's not our problem, it's the problem of the policymakers. It's not our problem. May problema, pero dapat ang policymakers, ang politicians natin na magsosolve dyan, ang ating government leaders magsosolve dyan, ang ating experts na magsosolve dyan. Hindi, ang gusto kong mangyari is that every one of us, no, will have the capability, will have the ability to do something about it. And that is why I prefaced a while ago in my reaction that each of us individually, our physiology will have some certain reactions, responses. Our behavioral will also have some responses. And then we can also give our own part, no? And the first thing is to recognize, katulad nga ng sinasabi natin, no, our first two speakers and also you, Dr. Susan, is to recognize that it is happening. It is happening. It is there. No, and do not turn a blind eye to it. It is happening. So what can we do? What can we do? It's not that wala akong magagawa, dapat yung governor na, dapat yung mayor na ang may gawin natin dyan. Meron tayong magagawa dyan. First of all, effects of climate change on our physical selves. We can protect ourselves. We can make ourselves healthy. Why? Because if we are if we are in our homeostasis, in our equilibrium, we can function. And we can function, and then we can do things to help others. Kaya nga, di ba, pag sa, I don't know, pag sa aeroplano, di ba, yung sinasabi ng mga stewardess, pag bumaba yan, yung oxygen mask, anong una mong gagawin? No? You help yourself first, and then you help others. No? Ganun din yan. Tayo din, we keep ourselves healthy first, so that we will be able to help others. Yon. That's the one thing that every one of us can do. Secondly, how can we help others? We do know that climate change, meron ng cycles, no, of warm periods, natural. Sabihin natin, wala na tayong magagawa dyan, talagang iinit yan eh. So let's just grin and bear it, and then hindi rin ganun eh. Meron din tayo yung behavioral. And part of the accelerated climate change is because of human interventions and human actions. And it is well studied, scientifically proven, scientifically demonstrated that greenhouse gas emissions, no, the accumulation of carbon dioxide, because of human actions, is the greatest contributor. So what can we do? Kung hindi natin kayang magbawas ng paggawa ng carbon dioxide, the simplest thing we can do is you see any vacant lot, plant something. No? Plant a tree, organize, magbabarkada, makita kayo ng bakante dyan, magbato lang kayo ng mga buto ng mga fruit tree, berries dyan. Dumami yan, makikita kayo ng bundok na baren, mag-organize kayo ng outing, camping, and then when you leave, sabi nga nila, don't leave trash, leave seeds. Di ba? So, yun ang gawin natin. And then, like what Dr. Eli said also, now is the time that marami tayo, we are on social media, we can all be social influencers. Lahat naman tayo meron parang gusto nating maging artista siguro ng konti, no? Social influence ka and take this as part of your advocacy. No? And influence one or two, and that one or two gets influenced two more, nako magsa-snowball yan. That's a multi-level expansion of your influence. So I think it is really a matter of us individually knowing, recognizing, and going into action for this. Recognizing that there is something that needs to be done, knowing that we cannot just rely on, and definitely we can use our influence to influence our politicians, our government workers for this, policymakers. Pero it has to start from us. It has to start from us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Ricky. Very, very powerful ideas. I think you were describing what's happening in many parts of the world, which is called guerrilla gardening. No? People just go around and plant, and I agree with you. I think that that's part of the part of the solution is really to green your environment wherever you are, because whether you're planting food or you're planting trees, no, you are contributing to rehabilitating the earth, no, in some form. So there's really a lot that can be done by individuals and by groups, and at the same time to advocate for or maybe against. Like I have my pet peeves about reclaimed areas. Stop reclaiming Manila Bay. You're already destroying the whole, I'm not going to talk about the Dolomite Beach, but anyway, Raymond, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr.
I'm not going
Susie.
there. Yeah, okay.
Very cogent points raised by both Dr. Lee and Dr. Quintos. And thank you also to the feedback from Dr. Gundran. Question here, and I think this one uh, has been chosen by Dr. Llamas-Clark to be answered live from Dr. Joseph Tortona. Any studies on the effects of climate change resulting in congenital defects?
Okay, yeah. Some of the things that has been under evaluated are the congenital defects, no, in relation to climate change. But there was a study earlier on, maybe about 3 years ago, that is saying the projections are that we're going to have heart defects, no, in our fetuses, and even neural tube defects as well. But you see, the issue here is that, like, as I was saying, because the way to do the methodology, of climate change is not very easy. So we really need to look at it from a point of view of having robust studies. But what I'm trying to say is that indeed there are some studies done overseas that heart defects and congenital defects, as regards to the CNS, the central nervous system, they have done some association studies on this, and they're seeing more and more. Projections are also being done, but we, as I said, like, we need to look at how they are bringing in aspects of methodology, because it's really not a simple thing, even the scientists are actually doing a big review, and the studies are being brought in, and they're very heterogeneous, heterogeneous studies. And if you talk about these studies, you cannot clump them all together, and you need to actually try to look at the merit of each one of them. But that's the reason why precautionary principle needs to be exercised, because we already know that there is some possibility and the plausibility of this risk happening. So as health workers, we need to make sure that we guard the health of the public. The short answer to the question is that there are studies, but we need more. We really need a lot of scientists to work on it, like physician scientists and those who can contribute and collaborate. We cannot only do it, like, say, from a point of view of the obstetrician doing this. We need people from the different, even, as I was saying, basic sciences, working together with the the clinicians, the clinical medicine doctors. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to add to that a little bit, Raymond, no? Kasi, parang I agree definitely with Dr. Lee that more studies need to be done. But I think in the study of animals, when we look at what we call persistent organophosphates, no?
Yes.
The organic pollutants, persistent organic pollutants that are called endocrine disrupting chemicals. No? So there are many chemicals in the environment that come from plastics, from other kinds of materials that we use, such as hexachlorobenzene, polychlorinated benzopidioxins, etc., that these ones actually do not leave the environment, and they've been found in marine birds or animals, and they have disrupted reproduction of birds and other mammals. So I think it's just a matter of time, no, before we begin to fully understand this. But climate change plus persistent organic pollutants, which disrupt, so they're endocrine disrupting, no. It's just a matter of time before we find out what the effects are on human beings. In fact, some are theorizing that diabetes, for example, could be caused by endocrine disrupting chemicals. So, we think about lifestyle, but they're also pointing to that. So I think we want to watch the research in that space. But definitely, we know that it has an impact on reproduction of animals. Anyway,
Okay.
go ahead, Raymond.
Thank you, Dr.
Sorry,
Susie. No,
nag-input na ako
yeah. I just saw in the chat that Dr. Llamas-Clark has an ongoing study on endocrine disruptors in PGH to be completed
good.
next year.
That's great.
So that
Yeah.
will be important, and hopefully that's something that we could share to the public once the findings are publicly available. Next question na po, and I'll post this to Dr. Gundran. And ano po to, marami na pong tanong na ganito with regards to our current policies and laws. Do you feel that we have enough policies in place in terms of pushing for renewable energy and not so much prioritizing yung pong mga coals, etc.?
Parang mabigat yung tanong mo. Kasi yung anong ibig mong sabihin, dapat i-prioritize natin yung coal over the other renewable energy?
Baliktad, Dr. Charlie. Do we have enough policies or laws in place that focus on that push for renewable energy instead of those na yung mga coals nga, etc.?
Hindi ako sure exactly kung meron na tayong mga laws sa Pilipinas regarding ganyan, no? Pero actually merong mga laws ang DNR at DOH, diba? Bawal na nga tayo magsunog ng garbage, yung incineration. So meron na mga ganung laws, pero yung sources of energy hindi ako sure eh. Kasi mahirap sigurong i-abandon na immediately. Alisin natin yung gasolina, yung diesel at saka yung crude oil, di ba? Kasi pagka inabandon na mo yan, paano tatakbo yung economy natin? Paano tayo magta-travel? Paano natin i-deliver yung mga goods from other places? Diba? Kasi like for example, yung mga electric cars nga, sina-charge mo rin sila sa Meralco, which is using fossil fuels. No? Pero ang alam ko, marami na tayong mga laws actually, pero magaling yata tayong gumawa ng laws, pero nakakalimutan natin naka-shelf na lang. No? So I'm not sure kung meron talaga tayong exact laws na na-produce na regarding that. I think masasagot tayo ng DNR siguro kung meron tayong participant sa DNR. Sorry hanggang doon lang yung kaya
No
kong
problem,
sagutin.
Dr. Charlie. I think we have one from the House of Representatives. I'll just read the comment. The Renewable Energy Act of 2008 provides legal and institutional framework necessary for harmonizing policies on the development of renewable energy technologies, and it aims to enable the Philippines to move rapidly towards the goal of being 60% energy self-sufficient by 2020 by developing and utilizing biomass energy. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you so
Raymond,
much.
makikialam ako.
Yeah, sige po, Dr. Susie.
Sige, kasi, law is one thing, but executive execution is another. So we do have a framework. We should be implementing that 2008 framework. But you see the licensing, for example, of coal-fired plants is an executive decision. Bibigyan nyo ba ng lisensya o hindi? Pag binigyan nyo ng lisensya, kahit na may batas tayo na we should be shifting to alternative forms of energy. And we must do that because we are importing our fossil fuels. What if we cannot import it? Diba? So we should be using wind, we should be using hydro, we should be using whatever, solar, right? These are all necessary already. Hindi na ito optional eh. Hindi na dapat siya tinitingnan na alternative. Ito na siya. Dapat yun na yung gagawin natin. So I think there's a stronger kind of emphasis being put on it. But then again, like I don't agree with nuclear energy, right? So ito na naman tayo. But I don't want to talk about it anymore. So anyway, in terms of law, we do have a legal framework for this. But are we allowing the private sector to invest? Are we making it more difficult for them? Diba? And we sold malampaya. Ay nako, ayoko na, Raymond. Sige. So, pagdating sa policy issues, talagang, hindi tayo nagsiseryoso eh. Hindi seryoso eh. So, the energy component of the climate change solution is fundamental. It's one of the most important ones.
Okay. And with that, we will segue to our fun quiz questions that we'll be covering. We have 2 questions po, no, for our fun quiz for today. Can we have it on yung slide po on the screen? First question po, which one comes first? Is it heat exhaustion or heat stroke? Dr. Charlie, would you like to answer the question?
Yeah, oo. Bago ka mag-heat stroke, dadaan ka muna sa heat exhaustion. Ang mga steps yan, heat edema, heat cramps, heat exhaustion. Tapos pagka wala ka na maipawis, heat stroke na. Katulad ng sabi ni Dr. Rick kanina, no? Na pagka hindi ka na nagpapawis, mawawalan ka na ng malay. Susunod doon, mamamatay ka na. No? So the answer is heat exhaustion comes before heat stroke. Back to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Charlie and Dr. Ricky as well, my physiology professor. Thank you, sir. 91% po, both in Zoom and in Slido ang sumagot po na heat exhaustion ang tamang sagot. For the second question, we'll ask Dr. Llamas-Clark to give the answer, but I'll read it first. Which of the following are effects of climate change that affect human health? Dr. Lee?
Naka-mute yata si Dr. Lee.
Hello?
Lee, you're on.
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you now. Opo.
Okay, sorry, I didn't quite get that. Something happened with my audio. I can't quite, sorry.
No problem, ma'am. No, we were going to ask, ma'am,
Yeah.
what is your take on the correct answer for this question that you see on the screen?
I totally agree. All of these things will affect human health. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And before we ask all of our speakers po, no, Dr. Gundran, Dr. Llamas-Clark, and Dr. Quintos for their final messages to our audience, we will just go very, very quickly sa ating evaluation poll, which is 5 questions, a 4-point Likert scale. Questions read, the panelists demonstrated thorough knowledge of the topic. The panelists were well prepared and organized. The panelists spoke clearly and audibly. The panelists used appropriate language with technical medical jargons adequately explained. And finally, the panelists contributed to new perspectives and knowledge on managing various key health issues. We will not be closing this evaluation poll as we now move on to the final messages of our speakers. Dr. Susie?
Yeah, thank you so much, Raymond, for that. And again, a big thank you to all our speakers. We're going to give you a couple of, a little bit of time to share your parting words with our audience. We've thoroughly enjoyed being with you and hearing your presentation. So let's start first with Professor Ricky. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Susie. And as much as you enjoyed this, I thoroughly enjoyed also being in this session and sharing what I know. And my only really message, for the audience here is that let's not lose hope. Now, let's always look on the bright side. Now, we might all be thinking that there's a lot of difficulty with our government policies, makakulang na hindi nagagawa, or what implementation or what. But there are still some bright spots. Like for example, there's a very good mention of the Philippine response to climate change in the Population Research Bureau of the United States, when they did mention that the infrastructure construction in certain areas in the Philippines have mitigated the impacts in the Philippines, particularly in the Tacloban. Ano bang nangyari dun sa Tacloban with this storm surge? Umakyat ba sila sa bundok? Yes, probably for the immediate one, but bumalik na naman din sila sa baba. But what did they do? The government and the community went together and built their dikes. Pinataas yung mga dikes, and just like what happened probably a long time ago in Amsterdam, di ba, bumabaha-baha din doon, and that's why they built the dikes, and they were able to engineer solutions to a recurrent problem. So marami din namang magandang nangyayari sa Pilipinas, paisa-isa, padala-dalawa, patatlo-tatlo, pero if we just put ourselves into it and put our hearts into it, individually we can do a lot of things. As a group, we can do much more things, and probably as a society and as a nation, we can do great things. So yun lang ang parting message ko.
Thank you very much. That's Professor Ricardo Quintos of the Department of Physiology of the UP College of Medicine. Let's go now to Dr. Llamas-Clark from the Philippine General Hospital. Go ahead, Lee.
Thank you very much. This is really a great opportunity to be with people, like-minded people, I would say, and I think a great day to be able to put forth this advocacy that we really, really need at this stage. I can only say that I think everyone really contributed. We know already that we need to do things individually. We can do something. As I said, the science is there. We know of it. It's really about getting things in action to work, on a bigger scale, because climate change really needs thinking and acting on a scale that is really unprecedented. We can do our bit individually, but we need critical mass to be able to offset this. If we can change some of the rising temperature, to a degree that if we achieve something in that degree, and I think there are projections, we can hopefully be able to delay the effects. But again, I'd like to tell everyone that it's already here. We cannot anymore back off. So it is really us going to move forward and making our selves be part of it, because in the end, everybody's in here together. It's not only about the marginalized person in the street or whoever else, but everyone is involved in this climate change advocacy, because it's all about humanity, really, our existence as human beings. Thank you very much, Ma'am Susan and Doc Raymond, Sir Ricky and Charles. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Okay, let's go to Dr. Carlos Gundran. Charlie, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. So my message for everybody po for this after this webinar, let's take care of our environment, because our environment will eventually take care of us. Kung ano yung input natin sa kanya, yun ay babalik niya sa atin. So back to you, Doc Susie.
Thank you so much. Short but sweet. Okay, so we're going to have a summary, and I think Menchit is here, no? Okay, so we have the Chancellor of UP Manila, who will be giving us a brief summary of our webinar today. Menchit, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Susie. Our webinar today focuses on climate change, a poorly understood, underappreciated global issue with a major health concern. Our first speaker is Dr. Charles Gundran, and he started with the definition from the United Nations. Climate change refers to a change of climate, which is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity that alters the composition of the global atmosphere, and which is in addition to natural climate variability observed over comparable time periods. So how does climate change happen? Burning fuel releases carbon dioxide, giving a greenhouse effect, and the extra trapped heat disrupts many of the interconnected systems in our environment. Now, Dr. Charles discussed the 7 effects of climate change and the corresponding effects on health, and I encourage you to watch the replay as he goes into the details. First is extreme temperature and heat, leading to heat and cold waves and leading to increased hospital and ER visits. Second effect will be the natural disasters like the hurricane, the storm surges. Third effect will be the air quality, which makes air less healthy to breathe due to the increase in allergens and harmful air pollutants. The fourth effect is the vector-borne diseases that lead to diseases with seasonality like malaria and filariasis and more. The fifth will be waterborne effects, which affect the marine and freshwater sources, as well as coastal flooding and sinking of some areas. And there are waterborne diseases like cholera, leptospirosis, and diarrhea. The sixth will be food supply, affecting production to delivery, affecting nutritional content of foods. And the seventh, and probably most important of all, is really mental health. The climate change leads to stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, general anxiety, and so on. So our second speaker is Dr. Llamas-Clark, and she linked climate change and the reproductive and women's health. And she started by saying that the natural hazards effects on reproduction and women's health, pregnancy and fertility. And as a matter of fact, births and deaths are associated with seasonality. And birth weight is very important because it is a marker of fetal growth. Now, this is the way I summarized the presentation of Dr. Llamas-Clark. And please go back to the replay because she gave a lot of studies. Coming from the presentation of Dr. Charles, knowing the 7 effects of climate change, she said that there's an effect on the mother, the father, and the child. On the mother, there is a resulting effect of malnutrition because of being prone to waterborne and vector-borne diseases. And of course, there is the mental health concern. Menstruation patterns may be altered. There is increased difficulty in getting pregnant. There are labor and birth complications. And there are pregnancy effects of heat waves and cold waves. On the side of the father, the quality of the sperm is affected, like sperm motility. Now, going to the baby, the effects on the baby will be an increase in low birth weight, fetal stress, neonatal stress, deaths, and stillbirths. And again, as I've emphasized, mental health being very important because it's not just the loss of jobs or the fear of losing one's home, but even just worrying about the access to prenatal care. Now, all of these have implications to future health and survival of the next generation. And that's why Dr. Lee said that there's the need for the health sector to work together with the other sectors. Our reactor is Dr. Quintos, who said that just how does the body react to extreme temperatures? Body will only work within a certain range of temperature. And outside of this temperature, there will be sickness and dysfunction. Now, how does the body adapt to the environmental stress of either heat or at cold temperature? First, he said that 70% of our body is water, and it is an excellent buffer. And the water buffer, if the water buffer is not able to adapt, our body has other adaptations. Our nervous system responds. If it is too hot, there will be dilatation, there will be sweating, evaporation of water. And she said, there is a comfortable range for one to function. Take note, 39.5 to 40 degrees as the extent of the highest temperature where one can function, and the lowest being 35 to 36. Outside of this range, our body cannot adjust anymore. So there are behavioral patterns that we actually work on such that we can respond. So let's say, what are the patterns? Drinking, taking off a jacket, looking for a cooler place. If it's too cold, we wear warmer clothes. So in other words, we do have some patterns to respond to either the heat or the cold weather. Now, if those responses are not enough, that is where illness sets in. And he only gives the spectrum for the heat. He said that it starts with a heat rush to a sunburn to heat cramps, muscle cramps, and then intense sweating, and then heat exhaustion with symptoms of profuse sweating, a fast, weak pulse, nausea, and then eventually fainting. And of course, the next step will be the heat stroke, very high temperature, but the skin is so hot, but there is no sweat. There is rapid pulse. The person becomes delirious, incapable of making decisions, and eventually the patient passes out. So Dr. Vicky reminded us that first we must recognize the symptoms so that we know what to do. We've got to try to help our body restore the balance. And if the environment is the source, then remove the patient from the environment. Another note that, another reminder that Dr. Vicky said is that the intrauterine temperature is 1 degree higher. Thus, mothers should be more aggressive in managing the heat strokes. So, learning a little physiology makes us understand on what the body can do in the case of an extreme temperature of either the heat or the cold weather. So in summary, climate change is a global concern and really needs a whole of society and whole of government approach. Everybody has the capability to respond to the problem. Dr. Vicky said, recognize that it is happening. Do not turn a blind eye. We should not pass it on to government. human interventions can help. Dr. Lee said we can be influencers. So for all of us in this webinar, let us join our speakers by making it our advocacy. Let us start by influencing our family and friends on the importance of a better understanding of climate change and its effect on health. Magandang hapon po sa inyo lahat, and back to you, to Dr. Susie and Dr. Raymond.
Thank you so much. That's Dr. Magdalena. And so I think we'd like to thank everyone for being here today, especially our speakers. Now next week, naku, okay, you're going to like this topic. It's on the epidemic of deafness. Yung mga hindi makarinig. No? And our speaker is going to be Charlotte Chong, who is the Dean of the College of Medicine. She is an otolaryngologist, that's her specialization. But she's going to talk about why people are becoming deaf, what needs to be done, how do you diagnose, the whole thing, the whole shebang. And I know that many of you may know people who are deaf or have relatives who have become deaf, whether it's because of age or even those who are newly born who are deaf. Let's talk about the epidemic of deafness. So we'll have that next week. Don't miss it. It's going to be a really very good webinar. Over to you, Raymond.
Thank you so much, Dr. Susie. So you'll see in our evaluation poll that at least 93% of our attendees po, no, and those who answered the evaluation poll really liked our webinar topic for today. Maraming salamat po sa lahat ng ating expert speakers. But before we conclude our webinar, we'd like to thank the very hardworking team behind the Stop COVID webinar series for helping us turn out quality content week in and week out. And for all those who are asking, and I've already put it in the chat, all of our webinars are archived in the YouTube channel of TVUP. So you just go to youtube.com/TVUPPH and you'll be able to find all 112. And then after today, 113 webinars na po siya for your consumption, and you can watch it in the playback. So that wraps up our webinar for this week. Magkita-kita po tayo ulit again next week, Friday from 12 noon to 2 p.m. It's a date.
Together, we can stop COVID deaths.
So keep safe, keep healthy, and see you online!